Thanks for this warm welcome and invitation to Dublin. I already had some very, very nice days in this beautiful weather in the city. I actually didn't expect that weather coming from Germany, where it's quite hot right now. First, maybe some words about me, so you know who is talking to you this evening. I'm an urban planner. I'm living in Berlin since 2008, and I'm in charge for all questions of general transport policy in the transport division of the Senate Department of Urban Development and the Environment of Berlin, and so also in charge for our general transport and cycling strategies. Before I really go into business, I'd like to show you three slides to show a more personal approach to this presentation tonight, and shared with you some thoughts I had in the last days when I was preparing this presentation. First, get real personal. You must ask yourself, who might this strange person be? Or actually this one. Maybe you realize who that is. That's me 25 years ago on my last trip to Ireland. So I came here on a bicycle trip like a typical German tourist who knows nothing more about Ireland, that there's supposed to be good beer, folk music, lots of rain and beautiful landscapes. I enjoyed it very much. Sometimes it was raining, sometimes not. And I learned a little bit more about this country, not only drinking beer and listening to folk music. And at least on these pictures, I don't look like the people as you often see in the weekends in the Wicklow's. I have heard you call them mammals, middle-aged men in lycra. Well, I have to admit, I look just the same if you see me at weekends around Berlin, sometimes now 25 years from that picture, but I won't show you pictures about that. When I looked at these pictures, I thought in a slight adaptation to the title of my presentation, my lecture, change is possible, that getting older, I have to say change is not only possible, it's inevitable sometimes. But then I thought maybe that also counts for transport policies. Not only possible, maybe they are inevitable, and I want to talk about that. Then I got, by Mike, this link to the Facebook announcement of my presentation last week, and I thought, wow, Berlin in one lineup with Copenhagen and Amsterdam. What should I talk to these guys about Berlin? Isn't Berlin still far away from these cities, especially concerning the modal share of bicycle trips, the investment in infrastructure, and especially in what kind of mobility culture is in these cities? Are there really some lessons I can teach you? And then I got a link to this article by Fintan O'Toole in the Irish Times last week. I heard it caused a lot of uproar here in Dublin, dealing with the bad behavior of the cyclists who don't obey rules and regulations, and they made it even worse in the streets. And then I thought, well, I'm almost at home. I know these discussions very well from Berlin, and maybe there's actually something I can tell you about that, and how we are trying to deal with this problem that we have too in Berlin, and maybe I can share these thoughts at least with you. All right, now that's the outline of my presentation. Berlin is a city which some people already entitle as a cycling city. Some say that we still have a long, far way to go until we actually have the right to say we are a cycling city. I suppose both are right in a way. I will show you some data and some picture and tell you something about what we've done in the last 10 years. And I think one can say that we have accomplished quite a lot in the last years in fostering cycling. But from this success, we also had some new problems that were arising, and I want to talk about them too, and how we're dealing with them. And at the end, we might see if there is actually something Dublin could learn from Berlin. First, something about Berlin in general. You will always have to keep in mind that Berlin is quite different from other big cities in in Europe. So if you try to compare Berlin with other cities, be careful. You see some general data here. About 3.5 million people are living in Berlin. I think Ireland isn't that much bigger from the number of inhabitants. They live on about 900 square kilometers. Berlin is a city with a very difficult economic situation. We have a quite high, for German Germany quite a high unemployment rate of about 13%. This economic situation also is one reason for the very low motorization we have in Berlin. That's only 320 cars on 1,000 inhabitants. That's the lowest number of all cities in Germany. And almost the half of all households are actually car-free. They don't have access to a car. That, of course, is quite favorable also for use of cycling and for going by foot and things like that. Then also important, we have a quite low commuting rate. That's also different from other big cities and metropoles in Europe. Only about 250,000 going in and out for work each day. So the traffic we are dealing is made by the people in Berlin themselves. That makes it in some kind easier to deal with it. And last point, Berlin is quite a polycentric city. We have very strong districts, and that makes actually short journeys, which again is quite favorable for using the bicycle. Another point, which of course is very important if you're talking about Berlin. Berlin has been a separated city for 45 years. If you come to Berlin today and visit its tourist attractions, you will barely find traces about this separation, that this city actually was divided for many years. But you still have to keep in mind that it was a city not only severed by an unsurmountable wall, but also a city in which the two halves saw very different developments, in many kinds of things, over 4 long decades. And then from one day to another, in the fall of 1989, this development created entirely new challenges for the city's transport system and our policies. You can still find some traces of these different development in the networks. Just to show you, this is an example of public transport. If you see this violet line, just take it as the former wall. Then you see the green network, that's the S-Bahn, our light rail system that was actually established before World War II. So it was always there in both parts of the city. Then you see the blue lines, that's the metro, the underground. And you see that it's almost only in Western Berlin. In Western Berlin, they closed down the tram lines. The last was closed in 1969 and built up a new subway system because they thought it was more efficient, more better for the city. In the eastern part, there is still the red lines, the tram system. And that's still the situation today, 24 years after the falling of the wall. And actually, if you look at the road network, it's also similar. In Eastern Berlin, you still have these radial routes going directly from the outskirts to the center. Everybody who's coming from this time and wants to go actually to the southwest or things like that, he has to drive through the city center. And the western part, you have these ring roads and tangential roads and things like that. So that's still visible in Berlin, that there was a separation over almost half a century. Some other impressions, some pictures. Some of you might have been in Berlin, then you know that Berlin is quite marked by a mix of all urban uses on very, very close together. If it's living, working, shopping, leisure options, you'll find that in almost every district in the neighborhood. Small businesses, dense residential areas, schools, bustling squares with shops and things like that, all close together. On the other hand, many green areas, you might know some of them, the Tiergarten, actually right in the city. Also lots of water, lakes, rivers. So Berlin also has excellent recreational and leisure time options inside the city or close to the city in Brandenburg. Also, of course, always in favor for using the bicycle. So one consequence is we have quite good frame conditions for cycling, but also walking. Walking is very important in Berlin, and if you know some of the broad streets and the broad sidewalks, that's really a quality Berlin has, and which actually is far better than in much other European capitals. Some data about the cycle use. That's the choice of transport modes like it was in 2008. That was the last year where we did some extensive research about that. That shows you all trips the people of Berlin are taking, not only commuting, going to work, but also trips for shopping, leisure, and so on. There are already 13% of all trips on the whole city, of all the 3.5 million inhabitants, were taken by bicycle. Now I think we might be about 16%. And actually most important for us as transport planners is that car use had gone down to 32% already in 2008. So less than a third of all trips of the people in Berlin are taken by car. All the other trips were taken by public transport. People were walking or they were cycling. And the closer you come to the inner city, to the inner part of the city, the higher gets the share of especially walking and cycling. Inside the S-Bahn circle line, you might know that if you've been to Berlin, inside this circle line there's still living about 1 million people. Car use is only 20% of all trips, and cycling is already far above 20%. So it's more important than the car inside this circle line of Berlin. Now, how did it come to that? I will talk about the cycling policies just in a minute. Of course, the cycling policies weren't the only reason that people have more and more chosen the bicycle for the trips. Cycling has actually become to a part of an urban lifestyle. Not only young people who are going to university or to school are cycling, also businessmen, members of parliament, all kinds of people are cycling in Berlin. That, of course, is very good for us as transport planners. It also causes some problems. I'll come to that later, especially if people who aren't used to cycling just try it out and get on to the streets. Everybody cycles for almost every purpose, not only work, also for transport. That might be a very extreme example, but deliveries, things like that, are more and more also been made by bicycles. People go to shopping by bike, and of course they go when they're doing sports or going to the countryside and have their free time and things like that. And they cycle for every purpose and at almost every time and in every weather. Weather could be better in Berlin, but it could be worse. Last winter was really awful. It was long, lots of snow until the mid of April. But actually, in most winters, there may be 4 or 5 days where you really can't use the bike. In all other 360 days, you can use it. I don't think there will be that much snow in Dublin. You might have more rain. But actually, I think it's quite comparable. Actually, there are only a few days where the weather will be so bad that you really can't cycle. Finally, I just said it, cycling has become part of urban lifestyle. Berlin is famous for its street art paintings in the streets everywhere, and also the bicycle. You can see they're all like this imprint on the street. Radfahrer sind sexy, that means cyclists are sexy. There was one summer 2 or 3 years ago, all the sidewalks and the bicycle path were printed with this symbol. So how did it all happen? As I already said, only 10 years ago, the situation in Berlin was completely different, and at least I think for a part of the development, one can actually blame the responsibility on our transport policy. So I want to talk next about our urban transport development plan, which is actually kind of the general strategy concerning transport for the whole city. We made a very important change in our main objectives in transport policy around the year 2000. Before that, actually, Berlin was becoming a car-affected city. You saw these pictures of these different networks in the eastern and the western part of the city. And I think it's quite understandable that the main focus after the reunion was in reconnecting these networks, both for public transport and also of the streets. That had led actually to a neglect of non-motorized transport, of cycling, and also of walking. At the same time, more people in East Berlin who couldn't afford cars before the reunion bought lots of cars. And the people in West Berlin, they couldn't get out of the city for 45 years. They moved into the countryside, built houses there, bought houses. And that caused a lot of new car traffic, a strong increase in car traffic, and of course, in the consequence, air pollution, increasing noise levels, CO2 emissions, and things like that. And that caused a lot of problems. So around 2000, the Senate decided that we had to change policies. we had to take care more of cyclists and public transport and walking, and put up in 2003 our first urban transport development plan, which had these new objectives, and the main objective of reducing car traffic in the city by a whole bundle of fields of actions and measures. The thorough update we made in 2011, 8 years after the first plan. This picture shows you the structure of this plan, from the guiding vision down over the main objectives, some part strategies, and the measures, which is a huge catalog for the whole city. And also you see that it's not only transport planning, it also is dealing with urban development, the environment, what is necessary for business and industry concerning transport. So it's an integrated strategy, not only for transport, it also has to deal a lot with urban development. We put this up in a very participatory process with all important stakeholders who are dealing with transport, not only the business, not only the authorities, but also NGOs of all kinds, to create kind of a consensus of most part of the people and the people who are acting in Berlin as stakeholders. The guiding vision, just in short, I can't show you this plane in all details. That's kind of a look into the future in the year 2040, how we want Berlin to be as a sustainable city concerning mobility, not only concerning mobility and transport. And actually, it's not just a vision. It's quite, as we saw it, as we put it up, quite realistic, grounded on facts and the developments we can right now see for the next years. And you see that we have these 8 points there. They're all equal important. And this goes from sustainable mobility for all, over the needs for commercial transport, livability of the city, accessibility, and things like that. And that's actually the most important part, where all people who were involved in this process actually reached a consensus. That's where we want to go all together. It doesn't mind if we are a cyclist organization, a car organization, or come from some business companies. The strategic aims of transport development, you just see listed some on the right side. On the left, you see the main objective concerning the development of the modal share, of how people are going to behave if they are on the streets. So we want to reduce the share of car traffic further to 25% of all trips of the people living in Berlin, of all the 3.5 million. And that means, as you see, that especially we have to take care of the people who are living outside of the city, because there the use of car, of course, still is much higher than inside in inner parts of the city. And you also see that cycling will have a quite important part in this development. We already have a very good public transport. We already have very good conditions for walking. Cycling will be the transport modes which we have to develop most to reach this aim, which we want to reach in 2025. That's just in short something about our general transport strategy. As I already told you that fostering of cycle use is an integrative part of our general transport strategy. It won't surprise you that we put the first real cycling strategy that actually deserved its name was put up right after we adopted this general transport strategy. Actually in 2004, 1 year after this, the Senate adopted the general transport strategy. And actually also this cycling strategy had a very integrated approach, dealing not only with infrastructure, but also with things like network planning, improving regulations, fostering combination of cycling and public transport, communications, informations, and stuff like that. And also there it was impossible that we put up the strategy together with all the organizations who are dealing with cycling, all the NGOs, and other departments which are dealing with health and economics. So it was actually another stakeholder process we did to reach a consensus concerning this, the objectives and the measures of the strategy. The main objectives we put up in 2004 were increasing, of course, the share of cycle trips, increasing intermodality, the combined use of cycle, bicycle, and public transport, to reduce the number of accidents with cyclists involved by 30%, and of course, always important, adequate financing and a quick implementation of the main cycling network of the main routes which go from the city center through all districts to the borders of Berlin to the neighboring cities. These were the guiding principles of the strategy. I just framed in the 3 ones which are actually, again, telling you that this integrated approach is actually the thing I think is most important, that you don't look just at cycling. You always have to look at the city, you always have to look at transport general to see what part can cycling be and what are the measures you have to take to foster it. The other things, actually, you might know, you have to look at cycling as a system which doesn't only deal with infrastructure, it also deals with parking, it deals with regulations, with communications. And maybe the last 3 points are important. Also, we had to motivate our own administration to deal with cycling, and in a sense of fostering it, not just only putting it aside or things like that. And evaluation or monitoring also was important. You just cannot put some measures and then leave it alone. You have to look, do they work? What can we learn from the experience after 2 years? That's very important if you want to learn from what you're doing and make it better the next time. Let me show you some examples for fields of action and measures. Planning of networks for cycle routes, not only the main routes for the whole city, but also for shorter distances in the smaller districts and boroughs, where actually most cycle traffic is taking place. We have these short distances in Berlin for the trips. And the focus here, of course, is on the everyday traffic, to work, for shopping. Of course, leisure is also important, but we want to get the people on the bike, mostly, if possible, every day for our trips. The kind of infrastructure we implemented, of course, traffic safety is the most important thing if you're thinking about that. But it still should be comfortable and attractive if you are on the streets. We mostly realized these marked lanes on the roads in the street and less separated cycle paths on the same level as the sidewalks, because actually they were cheaper. Berlin is a poor city. And we thought them more comfortable and safer. And of course, also they cause less conflicts with the pedestrians if you are as on the road and not on the same level as the sidewalks. Bicycle car parking has become a more and more very important issue. As I told you, 1.5 million trips each day with a bicycle. Each trip ends with some place where you have to park your bicycle. And especially in the part of the city, that's quite difficult. We try to improve this not only by putting up more cycle racks in public space, but also by new regulations which made it mandatory to put up comfortable parking facilities for bicycles, for example, at new housing projects and new projects for commerce and things like that. People who are building new houses, they have to realize really comfortable parking facilities for bicycles in Berlin. I already talked about the combining of cycling and public transport use. It is very important for a city like Berlin because in the combination, it's a real good alternative for car use, also for longer distances. Especially the S-Bahn is very quick in Berlin, and if you have a possibility to combine to use the cycle with public transport, it's actually very attractive. We are doing this with 3 main measures. First, allowing the bikes on boards of the trains and also the trams at all times, 24 hours, 7 days a week. But you have to pay a special fare for that. We have this bike and ride scheme, this bicycle racks at the stations, and we also are dealing with a bike rental scheme with a public bike system, not as big as the one in Dublin, which is still testing one. I'll talk about that maybe in a minute. Next point, communications, campaigns, information, also is quite important. This really great video of Paddy, I think, is a very good example how you can get people to think about why don't try out for myself to use the bicycle for going to work. Actually, we're doing in Berlin still not enough, but we are doing some things like city maps for cyclists, navigation for cycle trips via internet or for your smartphone. We have some different systems for that in Berlin. Print products for special cycle routes. Campaigns for more cycle use, we also did some in Berlin. And another example, we have a yearly award for special ideas and projects to foster everyday cycling. And all kinds of people and organizations can get this award. We had famous cinema producer and author Wim Wenders, you might know him. He got this prize because he is cycling every day in Berlin, and he talks about it, and so it fosters it. We have some schools got award to foster cycling of the children coming to school. A school last year got this prize because 80% of the children, actually small children, are coming to school by bicycle. And so very, very different kinds of organizations and people can get this award. So you might think everything fine in Berlin, Berlin a heaven for cyclists. Well, that's not really true. Of course, we are still far behind other cities like Copenhagen and Amsterdam, especially concerning infrastructure, although I don't think you have to copy everything what's happening in Copenhagen and Denmark and Amsterdam and the Netherlands. I'll talk about that later. Every city has to find its specific way that fits, that suits for the city, and Dublin will have to find its own way anyway. But still, this backlog in infrastructure, which is there and has been there, became even more meaningful as we are already almost too successful without having all the attributes of a cycling city. What does that mean? Actually, we are kind of overrun by our own success of what we did and how people are behaving in their own mobility. We just can't keep up with the increase of the everyday use of the bicycle in Berlin. There isn't enough money, enough staff in our government, and so we just aren't fast enough in establishing new infrastructure on the road for parking and things like that, and that causes problems. We have actually, just to show you some examples, not always enough space in the streets. Even newly built infrastructure is sometimes already too small in some places. Some older cycle paths, they're too small anyway. We have cycle congestions and some crossings in the morning. 30, 40, 50 people on their bicycles are waiting to get green light. They're not always waiting, sometimes they're already driving, or although it's all still red. We have more and more conflicts between slow and fast cyclists, because if many cyclists share a small place, that causes conflicts. We have the guys with their bikes with 35, 40 kilometers an hour, they're speeding along, and we have some older people who are coming back from shopping with 10 or 15 kilometers on the bike. That causes problems. Problems with pedestrians. So actually, in some points, we have reached the borders of capacity of our infrastructure. That, of course, also counts for parking. It's becoming a bigger and bigger problem. Too few bicycle racks in public space. We have about 27,000 bicycle racks at the stations of public transport, but that isn't nearly enough. We have more and more conflicts with pedestrians too, because bicycles are standing around everywhere, on the sidewalks, near the walls. But space is rare, and where can we get it from? Another problem, we have an increasing number of accidents. It's increasing, it's not increasing that much as bicycle use is increasing, so you can't say it's getting more unsafe to cycle, but that's a problem. 30% of all people heavily injured or killed in street traffic in Berlin are cyclists, although they are only involved in 3% of all accidents. That's a problem we have to deal with. Especially elderly and young people are involved in these accidents, and actually one can see that especially the old infrastructure, the old cycle path near the sidewalks, where there might be still some parked cars between the cycle path and the car traffic, they're especially dangerous. We have these accidents at these intersections and crossings, or some people use the cycle path in the wrong directions, or they use the sidewalk because they think they are safer, but they aren't safer, because the car driver doesn't think there might be a cyclist coming from these sidewalks. And now I come back to this article by Fintan O'Toole. We also have these problems, of course, which have to do with mobility, climate, or things like that. And they're becoming more and more. Actually, they're addressing old issues, because it's actually, you might think it's a fight who gets more space, who gets more time, who gets more rights in the streets. But the streets are as broad as they are, and every minute has 60 seconds. You can't give everybody what they want. That's not possible in street traffic. But we have these discussions about mobility culture and climate, and also of the role of the increasing cycle use. And some people blame only the cyclists for this development. We have a press and media that actually also criticize the cyclists more than other people, actually than the car drivers or others. We call them Rambo cyclists, and we have this discussion, especially in the summer where there isn't anything other to write in the press. But we have to deal with this problem, because it's a real problem. If you want politics to back cycling politics, then you have to deal with it. And I think there is one true core in this discussion. And even the NGOs have to think about how to get on with this problem. Last point concerning our new problems, that's actually new demands of new cycles, because caused by new cycle types. We have more and more of these cargo bicycles in Berlin, not only transporting, used as to live for deliveries like here, also for transport of kids, but they have other demands of infrastructure. We have more and more electric bicycles. In Germany, there was sold, I think, about 400,000 electric bikes last year in the whole of Germany, and they're also coming to Berlin. And that's a new problem, because especially these electric bikes need especially safe facilities for parking. The risk of theft is quite high in Berlin, and you won't buy a 2,000 euro expensive electric bicycle if you don't know where to put it safe if you're at the end of your trip. So, last point, financial resources are scarce. Berlin is a poor city, I already told you that, and it sounds easier as it is to just redistribute money in the budget. There isn't much to redistribute, and that's a problem of Berlin. Still, of course, we are thinking about how to deal with these problems. So, in 2011, we decided to update our general cycling strategy, and actually one main reason was the topic of these large amount of cyclists we have, of our success, and the problem that caused. That's, of course, still we have the political objective to encourage cycling further and to increase the share of cycle of our mobility. These are the new objectives. It was just adopted 2 months ago by the Senate, our new strategy. We want to reach a share of cycling on all trips up to 20% in 2025. That corresponds to our general transport plan I showed you before. That would mean that we will have far over 2 million trips with bicycle each day in Berlin. We also want to encourage cycling for longer trips, but that's most interesting, especially to make it more attractive in the outer districts of Berlin. We want to improve further the links between cycling and public transport, decrease the number of accidents in spite right now they're increasing, and we want this to reach an adequate financing, which we still haven't reached. And if you see this number of €5 per inhabitant and year, especially for cycling measures, that actually isn't that much, but it would still be a doubling of the investments we are doing right now. And it's, of course, far less than they are investing in Copenhagen or Amsterdam or other cities like that. The main topics of the strategy actually have remained the same, almost the same, like in 2004, but I've framed in some parts that are actually new and most important. First, to safeguard and enhance the existing qualities we have reached in the 8 years. It's also important to keep the new infrastructure in order that you have built in the last 8 years. This maintenance also costs money, and you have to have enough in the budget to do that. All new infrastructure isn't worth what you've paid for it if you can't use it after 2 years. And of course, we have some other new topics we are dealing with the strategy, which have came up after establishing the first strategy year almost 10 years ago. Kind of a headline of these new measures could be actually reallocation. Reallocation of space for cycling. We still realize mainly our new infrastructure by lanes on the road. They're more flexible. They're in favor for pedestrians, cause less problems with them. They're cheaper and they're safer. We now actually really have evidence that show that these lanes are safer than cycle paths on the level of the sidewalks. It's not really a new measure, but we'll do more of them in the next years. And actually, it's also a step to regain the road back for non-motorized transport modes. And actually, as I see it, as we see it in Berlin, cyclists mainly belong to the roads. They don't belong to the sidewalks. To find solutions for the increasing demands for parking is one of the biggest challenges. We will be more and more replacing parking space for cars by bicycle racks because there isn't any other room in the streets. We have to do that, although of course it causes hard discussions every time when we're doing this. In addition, new space-saving techniques for bicycle parking will become more important to level racks or automatically run multi-story parking garages for bicycles. They already exist, but of course they also cost some money, and we have to find the right places where they will work. Especially important this still is at the stations of public transport. There we have the biggest problems to find actually the space to put up more bicycle racks. All this isn't new. Other countries are quite far further there, especially the Netherlands, and I hope we'll get a little bit further there too in Berlin in the next years. Efficient use of space, if you don't have enough of them, is another point. Bus lanes can be very well also used by bikes. You have these also in Dublin. If there aren't too many bicycles, and that's actually a problem we have in Berlin, we have some bus lanes which are open for bicycles where we have 7, 8, 10,000 bicycles a day and lots of buses. That causes problems for the buses especially. So they have to be broad enough, and 3.5 meters actually isn't enough for situations like that. They need more for 450, 475. That's what we're trying to do if we're establishing new bus lanes which can be used by bicycles in Berlin. Another thing is regulations. Actually, you can do a lot with less money. Opening of one-way streets for bicycle in both directions. We're doing that quite a lot in Berlin. We don't have these one-way streets with much traffic, which we have in Dublin quite a lot, where it's actually not that easy, but there are solutions for that too. We have them mostly in housing areas, in smaller areas in the inner city, where there's not much traffic, and you just can put up a sign and allow it, and that causes no problem at all. Actually, they are the safest streets, because you see each other, the car driver and the cyclists against the direction, they see each other. The car driver might get a little bit angry, but there will be no accident caused by that. We have in Germany a special sign for a so-called bicycle street, where you don't have to put up any other infrastructure, but if there is much bicycle traffic, there's a priority for bikes. They can cycle two bicycles besides one another, and the car driver has to wait. And that can be part of important routes off the main roads. And we already have some kilometers of these bicycle streets in Berlin. Another point, more priority for cyclists is traffic lights. If you have to wait too long, you get kind of nervous as a cyclist, and you really don't understand where you have to wait, then it becomes dangerous, because then you still will be driving, although you still have a red light. And there's still a lot to do also in Berlin. It's kind of a reallocation of time, if you want so. Next point, also dealing with regulations, speed limits. The issue of traveling speed, I think that counts for every city, is of key importance for a transport system that is compatible with the city's needs, with a view both to safety and environmental protection. This is why in Berlin we already had in the past imposed quite a lot of 30-kilometer speed limits. Actually, more than 75% of all streets in Berlin have this speed limit of 30 kilometers an hour, mostly in the residential areas, but also on some parts of the arterial road network, because of noise levels or traffic safety issues, things like that. And if you have these speed limits, actually you often don't need separate infrastructure for the bicycle, because then it's actually safe enough to use the road. One general point, I think, counts for every country, my experiences in Dublin were like that also in the last days. Traffic rules and regulations should be as simple and as understandable as possible. I actually didn't understand everything I saw in the last days in Berlin and in Dublin. You might think that way when you come to Berlin. The simpler it is, the more it is accepted by the people. That's not always easy, but you still have to think about it, especially when you're dealing with traffic, especially with traffic lights and signalization at crossings. Next point addresses this thing of behavior of the people in the streets. I already told you that we have the same discussions in Berlin that you have in Dublin, obviously. And in my opinion, this is one of the biggest problems and challenges for cities with very fast increasing cycle use. Because if only the cyclist is the one who gets blamed for this development, it's quite dangerous. There is the danger that the political backing for cycling might be endangered. And if you have these discussions, you have to deal with them. You can't ignore them. You have to deal with them. So what we made, last year we developed with different partners a new campaign in Berlin, which addresses the behavior and attitudes for all traffic modes, with still the clear message that cycling is good for the city, and that cycling isn't more dangerous than other traffic modes, but of course that you have to pay more mutual respect for each other. And we put it up like a campaign for a new brand of a new energy drink or things like that. So you see this can with this German word Rücksicht, which means something like mutual respect. And if you first see these posters, you just don't know what is this. Is this a new product which I should buy? And then you realize it's just a message for a word which people actually don't seem to know anymore. And so we are kind of reinventing this word and the notion of this, and with some short and easy claims like this one in Dow's piece. You just see some more in the next slide. And actually that was quite successful. We found a lot of partners who actually were also financing this campaign. Cycling organizations, car clubs, public transport companies, and others are supporting this campaign. Here are some other motives. So on the right side, you see the typical car driver. You might think of one who doesn't actually is paying respect to another bus, but he's got the message. So he says, "Take it easy," or this girl on the left side, "Test it now." Just really simple slogans to get interested in this campaign. And these are some examples how it's visible in public space. You see it here on a tram. You see it on the bus stops, and of course we have some promotion events in the streets here at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. It's also running in Freiburg, a real cycling city in Germany, and they're quite successful. And they're that successful that the government, national government, who has funded this campaign, has decided that now it's supposed to be put up in other cities. It will start in 2014 in 3 other cities. So we hope that it's spreading all over the country. We have of course, we are on Facebook. We have a special YouTube channel where you can see some small movies who are dealing with typical situations where respect and looking at each other in the street are described, and they're made with propose how to actually to get along with each other better, instead of disobeying rules or driving in a way that causes problems for the other one on the street. Last point of this new kind of cycling strategy and what we're doing, the money. It's quite short in Berlin. I don't know how it is in Dublin. If you want to make real sustainable policies for cycling, you have to think very carefully how you are investing your money. This example is about public bike schemes. You have this one very successful in Dublin. I think it's really has been very important just to show politicians that cycling can be a really good issue for the city. But if you're putting up such a system, you have, of course, to ask yourself some questions. What's the main purpose? Who's going to use it? Who's it for? What will it cost you through the years? As there might be no big company who's taking over the costs for running. So as I see it, public bike sharing schemes have an enormous effect in fostering cycling in cities where cycling hasn't this importance as it has in other cities, whereas it hasn't been a big issue yet, where people normally don't have an own bike, like Barcelona, Paris, London, maybe also Dublin. And they have shown that these public bike schemes then really work. They have enormous effect. They cost a lot of money. But in a cycling city like Berlin, I have to ask myself, what do I really need for a kind of a public bike system? And if I had to decide how to spend, let's say, 3 million euros each year, that's quite a lot for us, for our budget in Berlin. Shall I use it for running a public bike scheme with, let's say, 3,000 bikes and use it for nothing more if I don't have another possibility to finance it? Or use it for cycling infrastructure, communication, things like that. So you always have to find your own way and to see what's good for the city. I think that this public bike scheme for Dublin was really brilliant because it made cycling visible in the city and in the streets. And that, I think, you should continue. In Berlin, it's a different situation. There we have to think about, but still we're thinking about it, actually. But we want to put it up a little as cheap as possible and see it only as an addition, for example, for public transport use, so that you get in with the subway or the light rail system to the city and then use the public bike for the last mile where you want to go, so you don't have your own bike with you in the train. Some conclusions to come to the close of my lecture. Is there really anything you can learn from Berlin? First, some general points of how I think a future cycling city should be and what I actually hope Berlin will look like, let's say, in 10 or 15 years. We still have a long way before we reach that. I think that the cycling city of the future doesn't necessarily have a large amount of separate cycling infrastructure. It has a road network with a modest speed level friendly to cycle use. It uses public space in a flexible way. It uses all regulations possible to make cycling easier and safer to cycle. It respects the demands of pedestrians and actually can be characterized as a city with a really good climate of mutual respect and in road traffic, not these conflicts as Fintan and Thule is talking about, and actually is able to continue fostering cycling even if resources might get scarce, and that always can happen. So what about Dublin? What I've seen in the last days, I think already a lot has happened in the last years. I hadn't expected so many cyclists here. Okay, I've been here I haven't been here quite a long time. And actually, it's already somewhere there what you need. Only small amounts, but it's already there. I have the feeling there's kind of a popping up of cycling culture everywhere in the city. You have some infrastructure in the street, which at least sometimes is a start of reallocations, although sometimes these lanes on the street, they seem to me really very small, so I don't think if everybody uses them. You have a public bike scheme. You have in some places really good parking facilities. You have even some bicycle parking at the DART stations, not very big ones, but you have some. And some signs of developing of bicycle culture. I've seen Garda patrol on bicycle. I've seen tourist tours, guided tourist tours through the cities by bike. So that's actually all the things we have in Berlin, perhaps more. But these signs, I think, that to me, they make me optimistic. Then you're getting much further in the next years. Of course, not everything is perfect. There's obviously a problem with car parking on cycle lanes in some places. And actually, I didn't really understand as a guest which cycle lanes really can be used all day by cyclists or which can be parked. And that might be actually a problem of too complicated regulations. If you can park on the cycle lanes in some hours on the street and the next street you can't, well, you do it still. Some possible lessons that might be interesting for you. First of all, it needs time. You need patience and persistence. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither will Berlin nor will Dublin turn into a cycling city in the short term. You shouldn't copy any other city in 200%. Not Copenhagen, not Amsterdam, of course also not Berlin. You have to find your own way. Actually, what I think is mostly to be learned from these cycling cities in the Netherlands and Denmark is this kind of culture they have, and this political backing up to the Lord Mayor and the very important people in the government authorities. They all are fostering cycling. They are cycling for themselves. That makes, of course, it a lot easier to create good possibilities for cycling in the city. Actually, I think what might be interesting to learn from Berlin is this more integrated approach, to see cycling not as a separate thing you should do something for, but still see it as a part of a general transport strategy. Because actually for the city, it's important that there is less car use. The car causes the problems, the environmental problems, the use of too much space for the car in the city, and things like that. So cycling can be a very, very important strategy, fostering it to deal with these problems. But the problem is that too many cars, people use the cars. That's the problem that all bigger cities have, and that's actually this problem still also have Amsterdam and Copenhagen. They have really good cycling shares. They have quite less public transport. They have still a lot of car use, and they have still problems with the car. So the main goal should be reducing car traffic, and fostering cycling is one crucial part of a strategy to reach this objective. Good quality infrastructure is important, but it's not the whole thing. You need something more and a lot more to get people on the bike. As I see it, infrastructure should not lead to a complete separation of all transport modes. Especially if you're building these cycle paths on the level of the sidewalks, you will sometime you will come to an end of the capacity. And if you take a look maybe to Münster in Germany, as what some of you might know, that is the most famous cycling city of Germany, with a share of almost 30%, 40% of all trips of the people are taken by bike. They have this old cycle path infrastructure on the sidewalks, and it's come to an end. They don't know how to deal with the amount of cyclists they have. So you need flexible infrastructure, and you can learn a lot of Copenhagen, Amsterdam, but you have to think about if you really want to separate cycling from everything else. I think that might cause, in the end, if you have really a lot of cyclists, more problems, and make it very difficult for you to change your strategy later on. In Berlin, we actually have a separate walking strategy, because we don't want to foster cycling and make worse conditions for the people who are going on foot, who are walking, but actually that's the best way to get around in a city. So actually, thinking these two things together and try to find ways to foster cycling without making the conditions worse for people who are walking. And to sum things up, I'm quite sure that Dublin will have a steady increase in cycle use over the next years. There's a great potential. That's what I have seen in the last couple of days. And actually, now it's the time to make the right decision to accompany, foster, and guide this development, because this will come. And now the city government, authorities, they will have to deal with it. And the sooner they find the measures, and they already start them, that are the best to accompany this development, the less problems you will have. The less problems you will have with traffic safety, the less problems you will have with these conflicts and behavior problems and disobeying of rules. The people who are cycling aren't better people than others, but they aren't worse either. And actually, they don't cycle because it's good for the environment, or they want to protect climate, or things like that. That's really great, but that's actually not the reasons why they're really doing it. They're doing it why it's fun, and why they have their personal benefit from cycling, because it's cheaper, it's faster, maybe also because it's healthy, but I actually think that's actually not the most important thing. It's fun and it's efficient for them. And that's what the people who are doing the planning and who make the decisions for cycling will have to keep in mind if they are planning for cyclists. Of course, the government authorities, they have this bigger objective and these issues to deal. Environmental, less air pollution, less noise in the city, less space used by cars, climate protections and health. That's the reasons why they have to foster cycle. But if they want to reach these objectives, they have to create the conditions that cycling actually can be fun. And come really to an end, there was this nice article in the Irish Times on, I think it was on Monday, with what entitled "On Your Bike, Confessions of a Lousy Cyclist." Some of you probably have read that. And I'd like to quote a part which is actually dealing about the fun of cycling. "There is cycling in convoy with friends after dark on deserted, lamplit streets, with Dublin as a playground as the city sleeps, or jacketless in the freak June sunshine, chasing the trees down the River Liffey, dipping the nose of the bike in and out under their shadows. While being carried along the breeze and sun, you can't help but look at the neighboring car passengers struggling with sticky seatbelts, or those on foot plodding slowly towards Phoenix Park, and feel smug. I'm free as a bird on a bike, no timetables or bus routes, no petrol required, no distance within the city too far. That's actually why people are cycling, and that's you have to keep in mind if you're planning for them." So I'm quite sure that for Dublin, concerning transport policies and cycling policies, change is not only possible, actually it is inevitable. That I hope also counts for my next visit to Ireland and Dublin. It's inevitable that I come back again as soon as possible, not after another 25 years. I enjoyed the city so much and experienced so much hospitality, so I'm quite sure I will come back soon. Thank you for listening. Well, we have put up speed limits of 30 kilometers an hour as I think in about actually all residential areas and other secondary roads. That makes up about 75 to up to 80% of all the whole road networks. And in about 10 or 15% of the main roads, we also have 30 kilometer speed limits, mostly caused by specific safety issues, or we have a special program for 30 kilometers because of reducing noise levels at night. Because in Germany it's not that easy to put up 30 kilometer speed limits in the main road networks. You have to find a reason for every single street where you want to introduce it. That's not always that easy. We hope we'll have some other legislation in a few years, but we still don't have it. Well, on the bus lanes, we have no separate lines for the cyclists. They just use the bus lanes. And as I said, sometimes they are getting too small, these bus lanes. So overtaking isn't possible for the buses. And if you have these many cyclists, then actually the bus is much slower than the cycles, not only because of the bus stops, but also the traveling between the bus stops. And so we are thinking of making them broader, but we won't do any separation again within these bus lanes for the cyclists. And the first question was concerning allowing turning right at red lights. In Germany, red lights right, and in Ireland to the left. We haven't done this yet. There is actually in some crossings we have for all, not only for cyclists, this small sign with a green arrow, which allows you, if you taking care and looking around, to turn right in Germany at every time. But that's very few used. And actually, where it might be interesting in a part of the city, there are so much pedestrians, so much people going by foot. Actually, we seem it too dangerous. Of course, some cyclists do it. And actually, we think if they're doing it and they are careful because they know actually they aren't supposed to do it, it's better that if they think they have the right to do it and just dash around the corner and don't take a look around. Well, the police actually makes quite often they offer to register your bike, so to mark it. So if it's stolen, it can be identified as your bike. But it's not mandatory, so just people can do that. They can. The police does quite a lot concerning cycling actually in Berlin, and not only safety or obeying rules, but they are part actually of our team who are working for cycling, and they offer this on weekends, on some pedestrian zones, or where we find many bicycles, so you can take a bike there and can get registered for free. But well, I would say maybe 10 to 20% of the bikes are registered, not more. We have that problem too, and we haven't had not enough enforcement by the police or the authorities. We're actually starting a project next year, also a bicycle patrol from the police. First, that they get another point of view if they are getting around in the city, so they get used to the view of the cyclists, which often police, if they are controlling people, actually haven't. And so I have sometimes quite crazy discussions with the cyclists. And also to do better enforcement actually of these problems that people and deliveries and delivery vehicles are parked on the cycle lanes. It's quite different from district to district. It depends on how much shops there are and things like that. But we have this problem still. It's all the cyclists and the police say it's still better to have these marked lanes, even if there is parking on these lanes, then still they are safer than these separated cycle paths on the sidewalk level. Well, the €5 per inhabitant each year that's actually we haven't reached that yet, but we want to reach it till 2017. That's the money that's really directly spent only for measures for cycling. Mostly infrastructure, but not only infrastructure. Cycling lanes, parking facilities, and stuff like that. We have two different, actually separate titles in the budget for new infrastructure and for maintaining infrastructure. And there also are some projects that are funded by the national government, which are more for touristic routes. And these, of course, we're also using for building them for everyday cycling for the people in Berlin. There's not included the money that's spent for cycling if we are rebuilding some streets in general. Of course, then we're doing this. There also will be new and good and comfortable cycling facilities. That's an additional amount of money which is really difficult to estimate, which is actually coming to the benefit of the cyclists. Concerning the campaigns, actually we don't have really many of them. We had, if there is one, for example, as a pilot project which is funded by national government, then we look if it could be interesting for Berlin, and then we try to get it to Berlin. And of course, Berlin has a little bit of an advantage as a capital, especially private companies and sponsors who are quite anxious to be visible in Berlin. So especially for this campaign, actually concerning its mutual respect and things, we're still hoping to get some companies in funding and sponsoring in the next years for that. On the other hand, it's quite difficult to get private money from campaigns. It's quite easily to get not real money, but for example, sponsoring by media, by companies like Deco who say, okay, you can use our advertising possibilities in the streets for this campaign because it's good, and then we have our logo on your posters. That's things like that, or some press media who are having advertising in the paper without that we have to pay it, things like that. That's actually quite easy, but it's quite hard to raise real money for these campaigns. Well, you have to enforce it, of course. We just had a big study about a kind of evaluation study of this 30 kilometer speed limits in the main roads. That's actually the interesting issue for us. And actually that was the results were quite interesting. We had actually reducing of speed limits in every of these 19 places where we had really data from before implementing the speed limit and after it. And the differences were between 1 and up to almost 20 kilometers difference before and after the implementation of the speed limits. Of course, the difference is higher the better enforcement you have. You do have to do that. The police is trying their best. They are trying their best, but they haven't actually have the resources to do it as much as it should be done. But on the other hand, we have actually expected that there might come out that some types of roads aren't actually suitable to implement 30 kilometer speed limits. But that wasn't the result. It was no difference. It was a smaller 2-lane narrow street or a broader 4-lane street. Actually, the effects were quite the same. So it's quite good for us for the discussions we'll have the next month concerning how to extend the speed limits. Well, I say at least that shows the evidence we have in Berlin. It's dangerous. The cycle paths on the sidewalks are both for pedestrians and cyclists more dangerous. For pedestrians, I think it's quite evident because you're really close together, and if you have this large amount of cyclists and there's overtaking between cyclists, then you actually have to get on the sidewalk, and that causes problems. And we have the most severe accidents with serious fatalities. We have actually and these intersections between car traffic and cycle traffic. And if you're on the sidewalks, and sometimes actually it has to be, there is car parking between the cycle path and the lanes for the cars. You are worse visible, and you are visible sometimes too late. Sometimes the cyclist is too fast, the car driver underestimates him. And that's always better if you are always be seen by the cyclists, by the car driver. Of course, as I already mentioned, as I cycled around this afternoon, some of these cycle lanes I really find quite small, quite narrow. And I felt sometimes really not uneased, because on the left there was a parked car and right bus, and there was maybe 20 centimeters between the bus and me. I can understand if people think they're safer on the sidewalk, for sure. So I think if you are thinking about new infrastructure, and you are thinking about new infrastructure on the road by lanes, you have to make them from the beginning broad enough. Just don't take some color and paint it on, and don't think about it. It has to be broad enough. I think that's important. Of course, if people aren't used to cycle, they feel unsafe if we are going on this. They have to cycle on the road. So you have, I think, to take some additional measures. Speed limits, actually, I think, is one of them. That's actually might be a combination which make it easier for cyclists to feel safer on the streets if the cars aren't that fast. There might be, of course, situations where still a cycle path separated from the road is the best solutions. That's also in Berlin. But that really depends on the specific situations you are in. But to sum it up, the evidence in Berlin shows that the lanes on the road are safer, and they are more flexible for bigger amounts of cyclists than these smaller cycle paths are. You'll have to find out for yourself what's best for Dublin. I can't help you that. That's not that easy to answer. It comes partly, of course, it comes from the NGOs and cycling organizations. They have done a lot in Berlin and pushed it forward. It's also it's coming from the planners who just have realized that they can't solve the problems the city just has, especially concerning air pollution, noise, safety, things like that. That you have actually to foster cycling also because it's still quite cheaper to foster cycling than maybe public transport, although public transport is very important, actually, also for cycling. We had this switch, this turnaround about 10, 12 years ago, and there also was, I think, the government and politicians were getting more and more in favor for cycling. Not because they were really self-convinced by that, but they tried it. And in the last 10 years, they have seen that actually it's something where you only can win it. It's a win-win situation for the politicians. And right now, I know no party which would say we don't want to foster cycling. I've been in our parliament 3 or 4 weeks ago to present our new strategy, and all the parties said, really great, and we will support you, and we'll take care that you have enough money to implement it. I don't believe that, but they said it. So the situation actually is quite good. Still, it is, in every budget consultations, it is still quite hard to get the money that we need. Because actually, Berlin is still a poor city, and every additional money for cycling, another million each year, that's actually what we're hoping to get, that's quite hard. But I think there is a broad consensus in the meanwhile in politics, in the authorities, and also in the public opinion, even the media, conservative, progressive, that actually there's not much difference. So I'm quite confident that we have a continuity in this politics in favor of cycling. Well, that was actually not only in Berlin. We had a new legislation, I think already in 1997, where it was allowed that without any additional infrastructure, cycling can be allowed at certain conditions, also in one-way streets in both directions. So I think we had the width of the usable road had to be at least 3.5 meters, and the conditions to see each other had to be good enough. And actually at the intersections, sometimes you had to build some kind of entry for the bicycle in the other direction. But that worked actually quite well, and in the last update of the national law concerning street use, they made it even more easily to allow that. The cities in Germany are very different with this issue. Some cities, I think Frankfurt, they already have, I think, opened up to 90% of all one-way streets for cyclists in both directions. In Berlin, maybe it's, I don't know, 40, 15%. There's still something to do. It's, of course, is more difficult if you have a lot of traffic in these one-way streets, or 2 or 3 lanes, like you have in Dublin around the city center. There, probably you will only have to get it done with separate infrastructure for the bicycle. I think there isn't that much difference, as I know the data, between cycle use by women and 50-50. But I don't really know it. I will have to look that up, actually. We have the data, and we can exchange our email addresses, and I will send you that.